Book Club, Chapter 2. Most of it was about accumulated emotion, and then the end was like the tips about mapping. Again, if you have questions, just jump in, ask, whatever else. Um, in the chapter in the book, he goes, "When your mind explodes, it's a great time to become a detective and gather clues." Right. This goes back to even like we were saying um, last week in chapter 1 about journaling. Like this really just expounds on that. So, and this talks about using your emotions as signs. Right. A lot of people want to sit here and think that you're going to be able to shut down your emotions and be a robot. You're not. We need to be using these as signs and as signals to where we need to improve on, right? So there's two causes of the emotion. There's the initial emotion. That's that FOMO, that knee jerk split second reaction. I want to jump in. I want to get in, right? But it usually only triggers a small amount of motion. But that building of these slow initial emotions is what leads to the secondary emotions, right? Which I'm going to cover in a second. But these are also typically viewed as the problem, right? The problem is that I have FOMO, so I want to jump in front. Well, yeah, that is an issue, but the real issue is the secondary emotion, which is when you really start becoming aware of your emotion, like knowing that you're anxious, so you're going to become anxious, um, and everything else like that. That's usually the underlying issue. Is all right. I have FOMO, so now I want to execute. It's like, why do we have FOMO? Let's actually look into that and then really working into that, right? And it's distinguishing between the two is muy importante. We need to know the difference between what is the initial reaction to the secondary emotion and being able to work between the two, right? Then there's accumulated emotion, right? Which is the residual emotion left after the brain's natural quote unquote like digestion period after you work through something, anything that's left over. There's short-term accumulation. This is emotion that quickly processes before the next day. The good old like why I oughta kind of thing, right? Like why I oughta, and then as soon as you do, you're good, and you just move on to the next. It might be just a bad trade, or even if it is a good trade, you could have good short-term accumulated emotion when you hit a banger of a trade and you're like, this is amazing, blah blah blah. But nipping that in the butt and not letting that one good trade turn into like winners till the next day like blowing your port. Um, and then there's long-term accumulation, right? Um, it's emotion that doesn't reset back to that baseline, right? It's that feeling before a trade that you're gonna still run red no matter what. Um, it's the bad version of the 10% challenge that we're doing in here, right? It's that 10% keeps building in a negative way, and it keeps snowballing and becoming worse and worse and worse, right? And like I said, it comes from high emotional and performance swings, right? It could be positive and it could be like anti-positive, right? Negative. It doesn't have to be always good, or it doesn't always have to be bad that has accumulated emotion. But accumulated emotion is gonna end up being a bad thing, right? Some Snapple facts, right? Emotion can accumulate over months, weeks, years around any particular issue, but not show up consistently, right? You might not have an issue show up in trading for a month, and then out of nowhere, you just can't seem to be able to pull the trigger or size up, right? That's still like accumulated emotion over sizing up is a huge thing, right? You size down for safety, trying to size up, you get all fucking nervous, knees weak, arms are heavy, like mom spaghetti, right? That's accumulated emotion. Um, we have flaws that cause such minor emotional reactions that we don't even pay attention to it. There might be something that makes us not pull the trigger a little bit too quick, or quick enough, makes us hesitate. These small little emotional things we might not notice or really pay all that much attention to, but they do have those big impacts, and that's going to be those things that we want to look for, right? Another Snapple fact: the great white shark could go up to 3 months without between meals. That's true. So even if you didn't do anything and get anything away from this, you do have a legit Snapple fact. Um, And then regardless how it accumulates, like I said, if it's positive or negative, identifying its impact on performance is critical for mapping out your pattern, right? Just because until like again, you could say, "Oh, I don't want to jump in front of a trade because it increases my risk, and if it's a bad trade, I might lose a little bit more money," right? Well, how much more money are you going to lose? Until we put like a legit dollar amount on it, you have such less of a chance to actually be taking it seriously and really trying to make sure that you're not jumping in front, right? So really try to pay attention and identify how it's impacting your performance, positive or negative, right? And then it's like, how fucked are you, right? We all gonna have accumulated emotion, right? So some of the important questions is your reaction to certain events disproportionate or out of line with what you think is reasonable, right? Do you have a huge, great day and you still don't pat yourself on the back? Well, that could be accumulated emotion because you're not confident or you want to hold yourself back or whatever else. That's disproportionate. You have a great day. You should still be proud of yourself that you had a great day. Are you making mistakes that are so basic it's inexplicable? And how could those be errors, right? This goes back to if you read any of the other books by him, and it's going to go into this, but the inchworm method with cleaning up your back end and just not extending your range. But these small mistakes, right? One, you might never chase a trade in a month, and then out of nowhere, you take one bad trade that was a little out of your risk tolerance, and then next thing you know, you've over traded 4 or 5 trades red, and you're like, what the hell just happened? Why am I liquidated? This is such an idiotic mistake that should never happen. That's accumulated emotion. There's some triggering event that happened that caused you to snowball like that, right? Do you find it harder and harder to relax at the end of the day? I've had that. When I've gone through coolers or down draws, it's natural. It's part of the game. But you know, the market. I was supposed to stop at 11, or the bell rings at 4, and the next thing I know, I can't think about anything else besides maybe a potential issue, or I'm nervous about this, or why did I do this? Those are signs of accumulated emotion. Again, this is why we need to be journaling and everything else. Do you have a shorter fuse or overreacting more easily? Ask my fiance about that. Yikes. No, it's true though, right? Even with trading, right? You might get frustrated easier in a trade, or you might lash out with other people in real life. Like, those are signs of other things besides just like the normal. It's normal, but it still needs to be corrected. Um, so creating your own map and yep, FOMO signs, right? Like again, we started talking about it last week in chapter one. So like some of the points to capture when you are creating your map is your triggers, right? This is gonna be the initial emotions, your thoughts, emotions, behaviors, action, changes to decision making, changes to perception of the market, and trading mistakes, right? All those fun little things that you could write down, note, and try to journal about. Really focus on your triggers, your thoughts, and your emotions during that. Your behaviors, like how, like again in trade, in day trades or whatever else. Write down your behaviors. What did you do? And again, changes to decision making. You might think, I don't know how many times I've been like, all right, I'm gonna size into this long, and as soon as I hear order filled, this amazing long that was about to run away from me, and I was gonna leave 1,000,000 points on the board, now became the world's best short as soon as the order's filled, right? Those are things that we need to work through emotionally. Like that's not just because we just got this order doesn't mean that this long is now a short. We need to work through that process before we entered, right? Changes in the perception, like I said, we want to size in long, we jump ahead, we're gonna miss it, blah 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 blah, and the next thing you know, order filled, we're idiots, it's gonna go short. How could we do this? Why are we risking it? Journal that. Trading mistakes, you're always gonna have trading mistakes, right? We should be again focused on the process, not the profits in the day or whatever else, so we can start working on those trading mistakes. We all have FOMO, so what are the yearly signs? That antsy, nervous sensation, the tum tum, right? We all have it. Um, I get it. Dan gets it. We all get it, right? That feeling in your stomach, that's gonna be the FOMO. Start to work through it. Start to diagnose it. Um, Well, that's a typo, but it's supposed to be the thought that says I don't want to miss another one, and checking a lower time frame. Right? I think personally, I trade the 15 and the 5. I don't allow myself to go below the 5 anymore. Um, I know Van. I think you don't let yourself go underneath the 15 anymore, or very rarely touch the 5. Usually these lower time frames, if you're not trading on them daily or whatever else, don't touch them. It's a different animal. It's the same but different, and it's usually a sign of FOMO, right? Um, so like some little tidbits, right? Some little tips for journaling and going over your emotions. Look for the earlier signs. We want to be looking for the initial signs, but examine how these secondary emotions were formed, right? So the original emotion that kind of ruminated that led to it, kind of really pay attention to that and see that natural pass. Set an alarm. Take a moment to notice your emotion thought process and everything else, right? Quickly write these down, like every 15 minutes, or you could do every 10 minutes, and then every 5 minutes, spend 5 minutes or 3 minutes journaling and 2 minutes waiting for the next candle close, whatever it is, right? And that way you're staying up to date with your emotions and everything else that's going on. Understand the intensification of emotion, and this goes back to looking for those earlier signs. Right, uncertainty is the start of emotion. Some people are like, "Well, I really want to size in here, but I have no edge." Right, well, that's uncertainty. Right, so start looking at your uncertainty, and then if you do size in, realize how fast that uncertainty goes into anxiety. Right, and noting the initial emotions and noticing that pattern and how we react to that, and tracking those emotions and mapping out those emotions is going to be massive. All right. And knowing is literally just the battle. Just because you have recognition, it's not equal to control, right? Just because you know that you shouldn't eat 50 million Big Macs doesn't mean that your fat ass ain't gonna eat them, right? It's not 1 to 1. So, but we need to be nice to ourselves, right? The emotions behind these mistakes are usually pretty intense, right? One way or another, and it doesn't have to be intense as like bawling your eyes out, but intense as in like, I don't want to miss that trade, or I want to size in because I want to quit my day job or whatever it is. Those emotions still need to be worked through. It is still a process, right? It's likely that this habit does need to be rewired again, because if you're just starting this now, if you've been trading for 6 months, 3 months, 2 months, whatever it is, 6 years, don't matter. You have a level of habits that you've gone through that you're going to need to rework. Um, and problems will not just be solved with mapping, right? Just because you make a diet up that looks really fucking great, right? That you're like, oh, I'm going to have egg whites every morning. That sounds great until it's in the morning and you're going to Krispy Kreme, right? Like, chub chub, just because you have a diet plan doesn't mean nothing, right? Um, so I'm just gonna do that real quick. Sorry, man. Um, and then it would be aware of the placebo effect, right? This happens. We see this in the beginning of the year with people when they want to go work out, blah 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 blah, right? Newness creates a feeling of correction. You're like, oh man, I'm never gonna size in with two minis after I was down on a stupid contract, right? I'm never going to do that. And you feel real great that first time you don't do it. Then you take a losing trade. And the next thing you know that you're like oversized, full ported in and getting calls about your liquidation, right? Like just because it's new and just because you're excited about it doesn't mean that it's corrected. And control is not a correction. Just because you make a correction, that does not mean that it's going to be long-term successful, right? And that's why again, it doesn't go, mapping the problems don't fix it, and that's why these need to be rewired and everything else. Just because you feel like you corrected it today and look at me, I'm an all-star trader, it really does not mean that it's corrected or that you have the control of it or anything else. And that's very important to also know and everything else. But that's it. So if anybody has any questions or anything else, let me know and we could just talk about it, dog.